Welcome, everybody, to the Customer Success Leadership Roundtable. I'm Angelica O'Reilly, Head of Customer Success, and I am thrilled to be leading this discussion on the importance of customer success leadership owning a revenue metric. This free learning event is brought to you by Success Coaching, where we've empowered nearly 30,000 students from more than 90 countries with our globally acclaimed customer success professional development programs. Whether it's self-paced online learning or dynamic virtual boot camps, we've got a program that suits your team's unique needs. Our upcoming events in Q1 promise to refine your customer success skills from outcomes-based selling to our very popular Certified Customer Success Manager Level 1 and Level 2, as well as our growing list of quality partner-led boot camps and workshops, including a newly recast version of our Management Essentials program brought to you by another one of our training partners, Patrick James. We're offering a special Leap into Learning promotion until the end of the month. You can receive a 29% discount on our solo all-access training bundle. You'll get instant access to all 5 levels of the CCSM curriculum and certifications. Ashley will drop a link and promo code into our chat. This is where real-world advice meets practicality. We invite industry experts to share their experiences, ensuring that our discussions remain grounded in the everyday challenges of customer success. This is a live and unscripted discussion. The schedule for our upcoming events can also be found at successcoaching.co. You may click on the Events tab at the top of the page to find out more. Our March CS Leadership Roundtable event will be a lively discussion on developing retention strategies for your team and is scheduled for March 13th. A few housekeeping items before we begin. A recording of this webinar will be available next week on our website. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask or upvote questions. We will get to the questions at the second half of the webinar. Lastly, please keep all the commentary to the chat window. In customer success, you'll find plenty of smart ideas and theories. But in this series, we're all about getting real. We're here to talk about practical advice, tried and true tricks, and stories from folks who live and breathe customer success daily. We have 3 awesome panelists with us today. These are people who really know their stuff, and we can't wait to hear what they've got to say. So without any more delay, let's kick things off by having our panelists introduce themselves to you. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what they do. And Kristi, we'll start off with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction, Angelica. Thrilled to be here. My name is Kristi Faltorusso. I'm currently the Chief Customer Officer at Client Success. I've spent the past 12 years building, scaling, and transforming customer success teams in B2B hypergrowth SaaS companies, and very excited about for today's topic.
Thank you so much, Kristi. We're naturally excited to have you on again on our CS Leadership Roundtable. You are an OG regular. And Marisa, we'll kick it off to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marisa Cox, and I'm pleased to be here. Thanks so much for the coaching. I lead the customer success team for the Americas at Cornerstone On Demand, where I've been for nearly the last 12 years, and I've been immersed in the wonderful world of customer success. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Cornerstone, it's a leading SaaS company. We provide holistic talent management experience for almost 7,000 organizations globally. So I lead a team of about 100 CSMs and their leaders who engage in dedicated and one-to-many models during onboarding and post-go live.
No big deal, Marisa, just 100 direct reports. And Mike, last but not least, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Very happy to be here as well. Mike Redbord. Been in customer success for about a dozen years also. Currently building customer success at a Series A startup called Regal. We're in the MarTech sales space. Previously led customer success at a company called HubSpot. That was a much larger team of a few hundred folks. So I've seen a few different stages and excited to get into it today.
Thanks so much, Mike. Okay, today we're diving into a big change in the business world, especially for those in customer success. Gone are the days when CS was all about support and service. Now, CS leaders in some organizations are stepping up to take charge of important revenue goals. This shift means they're playing a key role in making sure the company does well financially by keeping customers happy and encouraging them to spend more. This new role brings a mix of opportunities and challenges. CS leaders need to think about both, keeping customers satisfied and hitting financial targets. We're going to talk about why this change is happening now, what CS leaders need to do differently, and how the shift affects the success of the whole company. So let's start off with the first question. How does the responsibility for revenue metrics alter the role and approach of a customer success leader?
So, Angela, I'll go ahead and chime in on this one. It's a great question. And as I mentioned before, I've been at Cornerstone for almost 12 years. And when I started initially, we did not have responsibility for revenue metrics. And we were a customer success organization that was very focused on being kind of like a SWAT team that would come in and help customers understand how to use the product. It was a lot of, how to do something. And we were focused on happy, referenceable customers. And that's where we were in the life cycle of the company. Fast forward to today, where we do have accountability responsibility. So it's an indirect responsibility for revenue metrics. But I think it's altered the role from a CSM being a functional expert to being a strategic advisor. And so it requires that a CSM and their leadership ask why and how questions and move beyond just the order fulfillment of create this report or can you help me with this task to really understanding how what the request, fulfilling that request, how that'll impact the business, the customer's business. And it's always, of course, in that constant drive that we all know about driving value and then driving retention and expansion opportunities.
I like that. So going from more tactical role to more strategic role, and then how does it impact the business's bottom line?
And it's moving from saying, we're focused on happy customers and customers being happy to customers being successful. And that's a big difference as well.
Yeah. What is their desired outcome and how is the customer measuring success?
100%.
Are they receiving the value realization that they are looking for, not necessarily that the tech company was looking for?
I'll jump in here also. I mean, Marisa, I've had a very similar experience. Only you've done it in 12 years at one company. I've spent 12 years at 5 companies, but I've also started my journey not owning revenue. And so being part of a customer success organization where value delivery was really the primary focus and the metrics there. So the skills of the team was very much focused on that. And I think a different mindset and skill set that was, I think, setting them apart from what we're doing today, where we are owning the commercial revenue in my current organization at Client Success, right? How we think about the business and the partnership as a whole, it's very much more consultative than it was just focused on the value delivery of a product. Where even if you think about the KPIs that we measured, you may have been focused more on like adoption and usage of a technology. That was our primary drivers. Where now we're really thinking holistically on, is the partner getting value? Because it's going to be those value outcomes that will enable us to not only keep the customer, but to grow them over time. And if you don't really understand what those value drivers are for them and how they're perceiving value, you're not going to be able to have the consultative conversations to figure out when it's appropriate to grow. Because I'll tell you, not having that context is where it starts to feel very commercial and very salesy. And so when folks start to say oh, no, you can't be strategic and sell, right? Or you can't be consultative and sell. I actually will always challenge that because I think the best consultative and strategic partners are the ones that sell the best because you really have a deep-rooted understanding of what your customers need and how they need it and where your product adds value to what they're trying to work through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. I would just add that operationally too, I think, you go from looking at a lot of leading indicators, right? And activities and, bits of usage and stuff like that to not only leading, but also lagging too. Now you're looking at NDR, you're looking at GRR, renewal rates, various deal dials and revenue that come out of your contracts. And so you have to have a foot then in kind of both worlds of leading indicators and activity, and then also these lagging indicators of revenue that sometimes are within your control, sometimes tied very directly to the leading indicators, but other times don't. And kind of the puzzle is fitting those two together, trying to tighten it so you can focus on doing the work and getting the right outcome.
And I think as a customer success leader as well, you go from being a coach or just that escalation support person to being an operational leader, as you mentioned, Mike, focused on tactics and initiatives and whether those are, you're getting the value from those and whether you need to pivot and how you need to move forward. So you have to think differently as a leader as well, I'd say.
Have you both also seen a need and a shift towards the skills of the organization and what's demanded of the folks that you have on the team? I think one of the challenges that I've seen as CS has taken on the responsibility of the commercial outcomes is a lot of organizations will just put this on the team, right? Customer success is now going to own retention. They're going to own growth. But the teams that you built historically didn't necessarily have the skills or experience to deliver those outcomes, right? They don't know how to do the job. And so I think as we start to see more organizations take responsibility of this, the design, the intentional design of the folks that we bring into the business will be different, right? The profiles and the experiences will be different than hiring traditional customer success professionals. And so my advice to everyone who's in customer success, right, is like, get a foothold, get some experience and learn how that motion works, that sales acumen, and maybe even some formal training, because that's going to help you, because we need to really change how we're staffing our organizations as well.
I completely agree, Kristi. I think in the beginning when we were hiring, we were focusing on, can you be an expert in the product and be a product expert? So we actually valued it if you were a former customer. And that moved to, do you have the business acumen? Do you have the ability to, focus more on consulting? And actually, as we've all seen customer success as an industry evolve, do you have experience doing customer success rather than experience, as in my field, being in HR or being, an administrator of a system or something like that. So it does also change in the profile of hiring for sure.
Yeah, it's a really interesting shift because it used to be the case that it was the larger organizations that had a lot of specialization that needed these commercial skills. So it was only, we have a renewals team and those are our more commercial people, but our CSMs are more focused on value. I think that's just different now, right? I think everybody's being held to a different standard and it involves, really influencing those revenue metrics. As somebody that works at a much smaller company in a startup, I think, maybe 5-10 years ago, even 10 years is ancient history, but 5 years ago, it was, CSMs are supposed to, produce value, just be consultative and help. That's not the way it is now. You really have to focus on driving revenue, on doing deep discovery, on like working a sales pipeline in order to achieve those renewal and expansion results. That's become the norm, I think, in a lot of startups. Whereas it used to just be the norm in bigger teams that have more specialization. That's a big change nowadays.
I think we're all being much more intentional about the work that we do with our customers, as opposed to these happy accidents where, oh, great, this customer grew. How did we do that? I don't know. It's not repeatable, right? So we're so much more intentional about the work that we do, the conversations we have, the way we staff than I think ever before. And I do believe it's this revenue ownership that is making that big change for us all.
And this is a really good segue to our next question. And it's, what are the skills and tools that are essential for CS leaders now in 2024 and heading into 25 to manage and influence those revenue metrics effectively?
I'll jump in with one that, I think CS leaders often have relatively little experience with, if you haven't seen this before, and it's forecasting. And forecasting numbers that start with dollars, right, with dollar signs. And for me, like I work with my board, every board meeting to do a board reforecast, right? That's the nature of my job running a CS team in an early stage company nowadays. And I think, again, that's different than it used to be. Forecasting is complicated, right? You need to have data. You also need to sort of hold a finger to the wind and understand, macro conditions. But, what this does is it puts CS leaders in a, much more, I guess, like sort of influential in a way role, because now you're really forecasting the revenue of the business. But it also creates challenges where you need to have different data, different visibility, different skills on the team in order to understand what your forecast is going to be and produce an accurate roll-up. Because now that's what CS leaders are responsible for.
I love that, Mike. I feel like forecasting is such an underrated skill. And if we had to go and poll 100 CS leaders, what their accuracy is on their forecast, I fear that it would be way off, right? If we had to bet our salaries today on how the year would shake out, I don't know that we'd get it very right. And I do agree that that's a skill that definitely needs to be nurtured with these teams and get a better foothold on how to do that. I would add just a business acumen, right? Like I think that folks need to have a really good understanding of how businesses operate. One of the ways that we consult with our customers is to really understand what it is that they do, what are they trying to achieve? Like, why does our technology even fit in to their ecosystem and part of their solutions kind of, framework? I think historically we've been really maniacally focused on why they bought our product and how our product does these things and how it provides value directly. And I think we need to be shifting to the indirect impact of our technology and the partnership as a whole. So I would say the business acumen has a big part of that. It's being able to understand how businesses work, how they operate, how they make money, And then how do we really help support that? And I see Bob London's on the call today, and I will just say, if you've not worked with Bob, Bob is one of my favorite people to help understand how to ask really great questions. It's part of the Chief Listeners Officer. And I got to tell you, like, being able to ask great questions that are business oriented and understand how to sit back and listen, but then continue to probe to go a little bit deeper. So I'm gonna just say business acumen, asking great questions. This is a big skill set.
And I'll focus a little bit more on the tools, because I agree with everything that Mike and Kristi have said there, but I think the tools are essential. I mean, I was telling someone recently that before I'd hire my 21st CSM, if I was going to do it all over again, I'd hire operations people, because you need to have the data. And if you are going to be revenue focused and you are going to be producing value for customers, you need to have the data to go along with that. And in some cases, depending on the size of your organization, that might mean business intelligence tools. You really need to be able to track the opportunities. I know some organizations track leads, qualified leads. And so that can be another opportunity if you're really driving some metrics. There is, back to acumen though, Kristi, there is the difference. I know initially our team was very focused on logo retention. And then as we started, being more sophisticated, we started looking at annual recurring revenue retention and what's one-time versus recurring revenue. So there is some financial literacy and even understanding the contract company that I think are really important too.
I think it's spot on, Marisa. And I'm going to go back to your data, the data point that you just raised. And Mike is probably most empathetic, having worked in HubSpot and dealing with CRMs, but it's like garbage in, garbage out. You can't run a business if you don't have good, clean, accurate, current data. So I would definitely emphasize that, Marisa. You can't do anything without that. I think it's an excellent point.
And with that, so typically we're hiring CSMs because they're either functional experts in the industry or sectors that you serve. And then we're talking about now on hiring candidates that are either more operational or have that business acumen foundation, or that are more data-driven in their thinking. So how has the shift towards revenue responsibility affected your team dynamics and expectations within the CS department?
Well, I think I'm gonna go back to Mike's initial point when he talked earlier about the leading versus lagging indicators. I think it's expanded the scope of the metrics that we're measuring and avoiding activities for the sake of doing activities. How many times did you have this box checking motion in customer success where it's like, did you do a QBR? Did you do this thing? Did you have a call, right? Like, did you do a check-in? Like, none of those things really drove material value, but yet teams were so maniacally focused on activities and not outcomes. And so I do think that there is a big shift towards that. And how we see the teams taking shape, I think, is hiring the right people who have the right skills to do this. Now, I will say, I don't agree that we are seeing a huge shift away from subject matter experts. What I would say is that, because I do believe that there is real value there in understanding who your customers are and being able to speak their language and understand the work that they're doing. So I'm never going to not hire SMEs if it makes sense for the business. But I do think that how we train and enable the folks that we hire to develop the right skills, right? Not everyone you hire is going to have everything you need. They're not going to check every box. And so this whole idea of like hiring this unicorn, this perfect person, we got to get rid of that mindset, because there are really dynamic people in your, like, that can be hired and brought into your organization. You can staff appropriately to drive the business in the right direction. And in fact, I think diversity of hiring people that have different skills actually uplevels the entire organization. Now, this is where I think success coaching comes into play. I have worked with you guys. I have brought you into my organizations to train and enable teams. And this is where I do think there needs to be better investments in how we train, enable, and coach our teams, and stop just giving them work to do with the assumption that they're going to be able to figure it out.
So I agree, Kristi. I think the other thing that this shift is, it's, in my organization at least, it's facilitated segmentation. I think you do have to have specialists. And again, Mike, it's going to depend on the size of your company and where you're at. But you get to a certain size, and you still need those functional experts. So that's the needs that you're talking about. And there's going to be a room for that. And it's meeting the customer needs at the right point of time and being there where they're at. We can have a whole another discussion about, QBRs and the validity of certain activities. I think the important thing though is to drive consistency, and whatever vehicles and whether it's KPIs or things that you're going to need to drive that consistent experience for customers, so you get the consistent outcome, which are those renewals, those upsells, those expansion opportunities.
I think it's like an important caveat to say that the aim is not to turn CS into sales, right? I think the aim for me, at least, is to enable our CSMs on a selling mindset, a growth mindset, and some of the skills along the way. So, we need to teach curiosity and discovery. right? But we don't need to teach new business prospecting as you would to a BDR or an AE, right? We need to teach like pipeline accountability and forecasting, but we don't need to teach like, the same type of stage-based probability adjusted stuff that we might do for an AE. And so I think teaching some of the same mindsets and some of the similar skill sets are what the ask is. It's not to do a crazy U-turn here and turn every CSM into an account executive. We're trying to kind of create a bit of a Venn diagram, I suppose, between the two. And in the middle is a mindset and a sort of high-level skill set that to some people in CS does feel like we're turning into sales. But I think it's just dipping your toe in the water enough to arm your CSMs with the right mindset and skills to be able to go after revenue in a new way.
I think it's really spot on, Mike, but I think it's also important for us to realize that every company operates very differently too, and different products, different markets, different personas. So I work with a lot of folks who work in organizations where they've built out these really formal, overly structured customer success organizations. And I'm like, dude, you actually don't need customer success. You have a PLG kind of motion happening with your software. And if you're telling me that all you're focused on is growth, maybe those aren't the right people. Those aren't the right skills. That's not the right motion. And so I think it's also important for us to recognize that what works in one organization isn't always going to work in another. And that's always my favorite leadership fail story is the times that I've tried to rip and replace my exact same strategy because it worked here, it must work there. And there is just not a one size fits all, or there's not even a one size fits most model that's applicable. And so when we think about these motions, we've got to really adjust to what it is that we're trying to do, but understand that everything about our business is unique and we've got to take that into consideration.
I completely agree on that point, Kristi. And I think a lot of it is even businesses within businesses. You can look at different ways. You can look at the complexity of the customer's needs. There's complexity of your own product suite and what you're offering. I think that can matter a lot. Are you selling one product to one, unique customer base? Are you selling multiple products? And there's different segments and there's different verticals. And I think how you engage procurement and the complexity of that procurement process and what that looks like. If you have auto or evergreen renewals, very different if you're talking about a 12-month renewal cycle and then where you want to put your efforts at that. So it absolutely depends a lot.
And Mike, I know you talked about leading and lagging indicators. In what ways can CS leaders demonstrate the direct impact of customer success initiatives on revenue growth?
Yeah. So that's become a lot of our job, right? If our job is to improve gross revenue retention, GRR, right, then we need to think about how to, add 3 points to that this year or whatever it is, right? And, to me, it often involves a fair amount of backward planning. And you're like, okay, if I'm at 82% today and my job is to get to 85, what am I going to do? Am I going to do 3 programs that are each going to add 1%? Am I going to do 1 program that's going to add 3%? Like, how am I going to create, the bridge chart, which is traditionally kind of a finance tool, but how am I going to create the bridge chart to say, I'm here, I'm going to add a point here, a point here, and a point here. So to me, we need to think about what are the initiatives to get there, and then how will we measure and operationalize each one of those initiatives? And so if one of the ways that we're going to add a point, is by doing better value assessment and business reviews and the pre-renewal cycle, then what does good look like in there? Like Kristi said, it's not just checking a box on a QBR. That ain't it. It's about deliver it this way. We're going to have like a scorecard and inspection for that. We're going to know what good looks like so that we can tie that leading activity to the lagging activity of GRR and say, look, if we do a great job at the leading activity, we're going to get a point, and that's going to move us up and to the right. So to me, you have to tie the whole thing together, but it has to be rooted in this kind of financial understanding that for a lot of CS leaders didn't used to be there. Good news, you get to be best friends with your CFO. Bad news, you have to hit your numbers.
Yeah, I think gone are the days of outcome stories of just, look, we helped them renewal or we helped them be successful. It has to be quantitative and you need to have the measurements with that, and it's tying effort to outcome. And so, my team is, great, we got the upsell, but, it's really knowing those numbers. How much churn did your team mitigate? What is your team's NRR? How much of an upsell was achieved in a particular deal? And so that's where you can demonstrate the impact by really having a strong grasp on that outcome and that business outcome, I'd say.
I'm gonna flip it on its head a little bit also here and say, I think that there's not enough people who are focused on why customers renew, why they grow, right? We spend so much time analyzing why customers churn, or at least maybe that's just me. But I know that I also try to spend as much time analyzing why customers stay, why are they growing, right? And trying to create the repeatable processes, like what did we do here that made this so successful, and try to emulate those in scalable frameworks. So if we know that this customer, guess what? They had everything that they needed before they onboarded, right? They had their programs, they had all their strategy developed, we had the right buy-in, we had the right people participating, we delivered on the timeline, right? If we start to identify risk indicators that drove different outcomes and different behaviors, mitigate those and pull the levers that drove success. And that's where you can start to be more repeatable. Now, whether the success is being defined as growth, expansion, cross-sell, upsell, or it's just the renewal, whether it's that retention, just trying to find things that you can emulate and repeat. I don't feel like there's enough focus on that. We try to mitigate the risk that we identify and create processes and playbooks to reduce that, but we're not creating the processes and frameworks to drive the right activities that drove the success.
Yeah, super on point. And I even look back at my own CS career. I'm like, oh, have I done enough analysis on what drove this retention, the expansion, the upsell opportunity versus, to your point, on being hyper focused on why did they churn and how can I mitigate churn?
I can tell you the 5 reasons why customers churn. If you ask me right now, I don't know the 5 reasons off the top of my head why they stay. I'm being honest, right? But I know that there is real value in flipping that on its head. And I mean, I say it because I know it's a deficiency that I have in my own personal operating model, but I know that I'm not alone there.
Entirely.
No, you're not alone, Kristi. I would say you're not alone. And that's where I think, again,
thanks for your honesty, Marisa. Thanks for not like leaving me on this island to die by myself.
No, you're not alone. And I think that goes back to data again, right? So how can we can say, oh, they're a great partner. And we can go back into those soft skills that the empathy and the advocacy the customer success manager has. But I think part of it is because it's really hard to point to the data to say, what was that measurable result? That's like nirvana, right? Being able to have those numbers and those metrics, that's also really hard to be able to align your product with the business and their outcomes. And it's something that you as the company can measure rather than just relying on your customers to provide you with that. So I think that's another reason why it gets hard.
Yeah, you hit on a great point. And I'm sorry, Mike, you want to go?
I just was going to say, I like the way you put it, Kristi, because for most of us, we're retaining more customers than we're losing, but we're so over-rotated to focus on the risk and the bad news. And we invest so much of our time there that we're like dramatically underinvested on the good news and the renewal. And so like part of owning a number and thinking of things in this way and all that is thinking about how you invest your time and having a wise, I think, investment thesis behind that time. And but you called me out perfectly. Like I spent all of my time thinking about the cancellations.
I'm telling you, like, wait, can we also admit it's probably because that's what the board is asking us to? Like, let's also be honest. We're not spending enough time in all of these conversations focusing on why customers stay and all the great things that we're doing. I feel like there's always a maniacal focus on, well, why are they leaving and what happened and how do we prevent this? So I feel like that is a top-down, just behavioral thing for a lot of leaders. We need to probably change the conversations that we're having and talk more about that and flip our processes around.
For sure. Mike, you talked about partnering with the CFO and really honing in on forecasting. Well, the elephant in the room is always going to be the chief revenue officer. So how do you foresee the relationship between customer success and specifically sales evolving with the shift in responsibility of CS owning a metric goal?
So I think the interesting thing is that the tools of the trade ought to be, reasonably similar. Like I said, it's a Venn diagram between sales and CS. We're all doing discovery, which involves curiosity. We're all doing some pipelining, or sometimes the CS calls it, it's process management or onboarding or something like that. And so we should be talking about a lot of the same stuff. I think when you work for a CRO or somebody who has a broad responsibility, pre-sales and post-sale, you need to learn to speak the language of your leader to some degree. Otherwise, you're going to really be kind of left out in the cold. And so you need to figure out how to translate some of the CS activities into more of like revenue metrics. I'm seeing in the chat, folks are talking about like how can we get the C-suite to care about leading indicators? How can we get folks to care about some of this other stuff? I think part of the job that we need to do in this new world, if you're living in it, is to figure out how to translate some of the quote unquote traditional CS stuff into kind of this revenue language. And like we were talking about a moment ago, tie one metric to another to be able to say, if we do more of this, we can expect this type of result. It's not about checking the box. It's about the causality between running a great business review and what does that look like, and actually securing more renewals. You need to be able to translate it somehow into words that your CRO should know. The good news is that at the end of the day, we're all sort of dealing in the same stuff, I think. But you need to figure out what your lingua franca is going to be with your revenue focused bots.
Yeah, and I like what Marisa said on tying effort to impact and making that quantitative.
And I think, though, with success in sales, these lines are always murky. And I don't know any organization that probably has it perfectly clear, because I talk to lots of folks and then I ask about those lines, and a lot of folks say there's tension between sales and customer success. And so I think it's really just imperative on leaders to try to create those racy models and then live them and own them and know them and know what the clear lines of accountability are. And again, my organization, it's a true partnership, and we kind of live and die together. But even our organization, we have room for improvement in terms of establishing clear lines of accountability.
I'll say I have experience reporting to a CRO at some point in my career. And I think it also depends on that leader's understanding of also the value of customer success and understanding that there's a different operating model to drive retention and growth through customer success, and there is through the process that is new logo sales, right? Mm-hmm. And so, Mike, I like that I like the correlation that you drew on there between like the if this then, because if you think about it, sales has a very clear understanding, right? If we make this many dials, we have this kind of communication, we have all these meetings, we know what the outcome is going to be, right? They have it down to a science, and customer success just hasn't figured that out yet. And it is a little bit different. It is a little nuanced, and it's not the same sales methodology that can almost work almost everywhere, right? Where it could be a one size fits most, where customer success is so different and nuanced in that sense that we've got to figure out what does that look like, right? What are the things, that causality that's going to string those outcomes together so that it can be more repeatable. And I think if we can really hone that in, and then Mike, to your point, have the language through metrics that our CROs want to hear and can understand, speaking their language, then I think it'll help us all be more successful in working together. I would say I struggled a lot with that earlier in my career reporting to CRO, because I couldn't understand why they couldn't understand that we were different. How we do things is different, right? And so being able to open lines of communication and education there, I think, is also really a big part of it.
And with the revenue targets, so we know that we're partnering with the chief revenue officer, we're partnering with CFOs, we're partnering with our boards when we're presenting to them on a quarterly basis. How are you thinking the CS leader should set and manage realistic revenue targets that are aligned with customer success outcomes?
So one thing that comes to mind to me for this is that, of course, you want to tie your revenue targets to the overall company growth targets, but you need to account for differences, especially if you have a scaled customer success organization. So what I find is that, the more interaction, the higher touch that we have, of course, you're going to have higher renewal rates. And so I think it doesn't make sense if you're going to have a scaled customer success model. And by that, I mean that not every customer has a named person. Maybe they have digital success, or they have one-to-many shared CSMs available to them. That you're going to see potentially a lower renewal rate if you have lower touch. And so you can't come across and say 90% retention for all across the board. I think you need to account for what those different models, if you have a scale model, what that's going to do, and then arrive at a reasonable number, stretch number always, of course, but something that's reasonable and achievable.
Can I ask a question to Mike and Marisa? Is this a safe place? It's just the four of us. Let me ask a question here. Are you both involved in setting the targets and quotas that you all have to achieve, or are those numbers set for you?
They're set.
And Marisa, who are they
Bad
set
news.
by?
They're set for almost everybody. It's by stage, it's by the type of capital you took, right? Most folks, most VPs, CROs, they're all setting their own numbers.
Right. And so I think it's important for us to just live in that reality too, is that we are being held accountable to numbers that I don't think have really been thought through of how to go about doing it, right? We're not really analyzing the data bottom up. Everything is being set top down and being forced to us. And so I think that sometimes when we have those types of operating models, which again, Mike, to your point, you're right. Yes, many of us do. It drives, I would say, certain behaviors, unfavorable behaviors, right? Different motions that we're doing things that don't feel natural and organic to our customers because we do have to hit these numbers. And so I think it is important for us to also recognize that like some of this might be very difficult. And for customer success organizations that hadn't had a revenue responsibility before, it's really changing everything that we do every day. I think it's really tough to manage towards those. I mean, yes, like the two of you, I am also given a number that I have to build towards. And sometimes it is really difficult to figure out how we're going to get there because there's so many nuances, right? And depending on your product, right? Is it based on, I'll give you an example, right? Like our product, we sell licenses and it's based on seats. And guess what happened in 2023? Teams were contracting. They were not growing, right? So let me tell you how hard it was to hit my revenue target. Impossible. Because I can't control that. I can't help those teams grow more so they buy more. And it's just the nature of our solution, how it's structured. So it is really difficult to manage in certain situations when it's not being taken into account all of the factors that are at play when you're trying to grow or retain these customers.
Also, you're trying to do all this in a world where you don't have an infinite amount of money to spend on tools or process development or people. And so in a world where CS leaders are being asked to do more with revenue, but we have the same amount or maybe less money as a percentage of total revenue to spend on doing it, you end up with roles that are kind of closer to the money, right? And I think we mentioned it before, just how the skill set and everything is changing. The jobs are changing too within CS organization. And so things that are like clearly mission critical are things like onboarding or implementation. If you don't get your customers stood up, it's going to be hard to do much from there. And then beyond that, like renewals are pretty critical. And sometimes the stuff in the middle, to the point about customers having a great experience, the stuff in the middle is what can create great experience and advocacy. But it's sometimes the first thing that like gets cut when you really need to focus on these revenue targets and get your new cohorts in a spot where they're going to be successful and retain your old cohorts and produce a revenue number. And so there's a world that we're seeing today, I think, where specialization is moving closer to the contracts, right? And closer to very clearly sort of necessary things, and therefore away from, some of the activities and maybe more strategic behaviors that have produced really great customer experiences in the past. That's a very different style of quote unquote CS organization than we had, 5 or 10 years ago.
Yes to everything you just said.
So if the targets are being
I wish I had infinite money.
Don't we all?
Yeah, one day. If the targets are being set for you, how are you realistically managing that target or that quota? Like, are you giving pushback?
I don't know. Mike made a very valid point, right? Like you have a number, you've got to build towards it. So you figure out what are the levers that you have to pull to get there, right? So I'm analyzing all of the different, like you're looking at every single piece of data that you've got access to understand what can you work, what programs are going to work, what initiatives you have to start deploying with the team, and where your areas of focus are, right? The customers where there is growth potential are likely to get more time and attention than customers who maybe don't have the same growth opportunities, right? And so this is to Mike's point, when we think about specialty roles and breaking those out, yeah, onboarding will likely get some love, but it's going to be the folks that have account management experience that are going to be nurturing these accounts to figure out where that revenue can come from.
See, actually, I'm doing something a little bit different with my team this year. I have, of course, like you all, aggressive targets to meet. But I'm trying to fix what I see as an issue of, I think that we've underinvested in onboarding. And so I'm trying to invest more in onboarding, because I think that what happens later, you can have fantastic CSMs, but if we don't know why they purchased, if we don't know what the value metrics are going to be and how we can measure it, it doesn't matter how good the CSM is. They're chasing it. And so I think you actually have to reinvest early on in some of those onboarding. And it's going to be a little bit lagging, in terms of seeing that return. But I'm trying to double down and say there's got to be a different way of coming to the customer and really making sure that you get out of implementation, really having that roadmap properly. And so it's a little bit on its head, and it's a little bit different than saying, let's invest more kind of, I'll say, downstream in the customer journey. But I think if you don't have it right in the beginning, it doesn't matter how good your folks are later.
Let's also talk about the fact that having it right in the beginning changes when a customer has been with you for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. You've had 4 different leaders. There's turnover on the team. You've got different end users, right? So I feel like onboarding doesn't necessarily just start and stop at the beginning of a partnership. Mm-hmm. We've had to double down on re-onboarding customers, right? Like customers who have been with us for 24 months plus. I've got a re-onboarding campaign that we've got deployed to get them reset up, re-enabled, How do we do better and stronger field training? Because end users have turned around. Look at this. Like, how many people were laid off? I think it was like almost 300,000 people across over 1,100 SaaS companies in 2023 were laid off. And that turnover means new people came and went, right? People that had the IP and knew how to use your software, understood the value, they're not there anymore, right? So it's this interesting kind of push-pull that we're faced with, because when does that start and stop? It just doesn't. And so we're focusing sometimes on the wrong things at the wrong times. And that's the data thing. If we've got the right insights, we could figure it out a little bit, but it's hard, man.
Yep.
So we have
Thinking
a lot
about
of
the question for one more thought. Thinking about the question for a moment of, hey, you're given a number and you got to hit it. Like, what are you going to do? CS leaders are not the first leaders on earth to be up against this conundrum, right? Our friends in sales, this is what they've been doing since forever, right? So, I think this is a good question to pose to like your VP of sales friends on the other side of the aisle. For folks listening in, like, ask your VP of sales how they deal with that. And I think traditionally what the VP of sales does is say, okay, get me more leads. I'll sign them up. Like, I've got my process, I've got my funnel, right? If I can make X many MQLs and SQLs, I can close this many deals. And so to the previous conversation we were having about, knowing your numbers, knowing like, for every successful CSQL or QBR I do, what's the percent chance that renews, right? I think CS leaders are now in the same type of, conundrum where we need to understand, well, what needs to change on the inputs in order for us to hit that output? And so, okay, we maybe can't change the number of customers, but to Marisa's point, if we onboard them better, that could have a very, very, very different throughput. And so that's what I need to do to hit that number. But our friends in sales have been kind of dealing with this pressure for a long time. Usually they just say they need more leads because it's kind of figured out over there, to Kristi's point. I think for us, we need to figure out in CS, well, what are the inputs that we can play with in order to get to that revenue output?
I think our inputs also start, let's be honest, before their customers, right? This goes back to like, are we closing the right ICP customers? Are we setting the right expectations? Are they buying the product with the right objectives in mind? So I think that our inputs, unfortunately, are sometimes outside of our control because we are dealt the cards that we have to play with. And so unfortunately, if we do not have a good pool of customers to grow, nurture, and that can be successful in the partnership, it's an even greater challenge. And I like to think that we are maybe getting better because we're having better conversations with our cross-functional peers. I see it all the time. It's still a big challenge for a lot of businesses.
And this is a good segue, Kristi, to a question in Q&A from Tanner, who asks about cross-functional teams. It's, how do we ensure that cross-functional teams such as sales and AEs and CSO teams do not treat each other as competitors, which causes friction when they're going for similar upsells and meeting targeted OKRs and quotas? Who wants to take that one?
I'm happy to jump in here. I think if you've got an organization that is pitting your people together and saying you're all fishing in the same pond, that's going to happen, right? So there has to be better swim lanes and different roles and responsibilities, right? You can't be pitting people together like that. The way that I've seen it work very successfully is like, if you're working in an account team structure, then great. Then you're holding both people who have the ability to nurture and grow those accounts accountable for the same number, which means it doesn't matter who does it. You both win if you get there. But if you want to flip it and say like, okay, we're not going to do that approach and you have to grow this number and you have to grow that number, then divide the business. You cannot have them fishing in the same pond. You're literally setting them up to have that conflict.
Yeah, the reason no, please go ahead, Marisa.
No, I was just going to say, and in terms of, I mentioned before, my team has indirect accountability. We actually are tied to the sales number to create that alignment. And so, about 15% of our variable compensation is based on the performance of sales. And that over the years has changed, but that's created that alignment to say, we are as invested as you are. So let's partner together. And I think it's created a lot of trust, more trust. And it has facilitated a lot of that partnership because we are aligned to the same metrics and it's not a competing metric. Again, like you said, Kristi, kind of competing for our pool.
Yeah, I was just going to underscore that question sort of belies to me a planning issue, to Kristi's point. We're all fishing in the same pond, but it also speaks to me that there's like a little bit of a, I don't know, kind of cultural thing that I don't love in it, because, at the end of the day, your peers are in many ways your first team that you need to work with. And if you're working, with a sales leader and a marketing leader as a CS leader, like, it's all the same number, folks. And you got to figure out how to go after it together and hit that goal. And so if you feel pitted against your peers organizationally, I think you need to flip the script and think about how to create like a really solid team at the horizontal level in the org chart, rather than keeping everybody in their little fiefdom vertically. That's just a problem long term, and it's not going to create the best possible outcome.
And a lot of great questions coming into the Q&A. If there's a specific question that the audience has that you definitely want us to pose to Kristi, Marisa, and Mike, definitely upvote it, and then we will seed it to them. But speaking about comp, we have an audience member who said, I've recently been asked to collaborate with sales before they close for larger deals. How is this normally rewarded in CS? Should I consider proposing a split in commission?
You can propose that. Sure.
Sure
I don't know. You can do anything. I'm empowering you to go do anything. Let's be realistic, though. You're not going to get a portion of the sales comp because you facilitated a conversation to ensure that we have good set expectations and we can successfully onboard the customer. Unless you are unless you're a solutions engineer who is part of the sales process and embedded in that over time, you're not part of closing it. You were part of a conversation that facilitated that close. And it's advantageous for you to be part of that process. It's allowing you to capture insights and set expectations and to build relationships earlier in the partnership. So maybe your leader is going to be kind and give you a spiff for helping out, but a comp split, highly unlikely.
Another
question. I feel like that was an aggressive response. I apologize if that came off harsh, but
100%. The salesperson's not going to cut you a check out of their own pocket. Come on.
And I think there can be some particularly large deals or particularly large investments where maybe there is, like you said, a spiff or something like that. But we need to fundamentally also look at, and it can be hard depending on if you get quota or commission, but sales is compensated, at least in my organization, very differently. And there's different pressures, and their base salary is then a little lower. So you're in the role that you're in. If you really want to have more of that upside, then you should consider sales. And actually, I've seen some customer success managers who are terrific moving over into account management roles, but we do need to keep that position, I think.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're accountable for the outcomes of sales and you're now taking part ownership of net new logo sales, I don't think that there's going to be a world where you're getting paid for that. Going back to accountability, right?
Transparency here with our panel. Another question that's been upvoted, what trends do you foresee in the coming years regarding the intersection of customer success and revenue ownership, and how should CS leaders prepare for these changes?
The number one thing that I think folks can do is just become more financially literate. Like, read a balance sheet, know how a P&L works, understand the leverage in a SaaS model, know what discounted cash flow is. Like, these things you can ask ChatGPT, it'll give you like a half an answer. You can go do the rest of the research. But like, to me, that's the language that you need to learn to speak in this, if you want a seat at this new table, right? And I think it's actually kind of funny to me how little operational leaders in sales and CS speak this stuff. It's the language of capital. It's the language of your board. It's the language of your CEO, your CFO, and your investors. But you need to learn to speak a little bit of that if you want to really understand what's going on here, and also just perform at your best, because the opportunities that will kind of become obvious to you once you speak that language and understand really how the balance sheet works are going to be different than if you're just looking at your health score.
And I think it's understanding that there are levers. It's understanding what your business's goal or outcome is, and recognizing there are different levers. So maybe you didn't hit your retention number, but maybe you had greater expansion numbers. It's understanding how those work to achieve ultimately what the business is trying to achieve. And I think that's really important as well.
And Christian asked a similar question. What are the base skills a CS must have, in your opinion, to be successful besides that growth mindset? So, Mike, I know you touched upon being literate on the metrics, using ChatGPT to help you get there. Anything else that you can think of to empower both maybe the CS leadership, but also CSMs to be more successful?
And Christian,
I mean, we can rip off any. Yeah, I was going to say, we hit on a bunch of this during our conversation today. So just to summarize some of the points, right? Marisa talked about data literacy, financial literacy, business acumen, right? Relationship development, all of those things play into the skill set that's going to help you be successful in driving that. But at the end of the day, you have to understand the metrics.
Thank you for the TLDR, Kristi. We'll have to caption that. on our LinkedIn feed. Another question, in what way in your experience do your CSMs need, want, or are being compensated by owning renewal or other numbers? And what's the CS industry saying about it?
I think there's a different model at every single company, so it's interesting to have what the industry, because it depends, again, on the maturity of your organization, where you're at. I don't know that any, I think going to Kristi, I saw you at the CS 100 last fall. Every organization is doing it completely different. So there is a mix. It seems it's about a 70-30 roughly, or 80-20 mix, depending between the base salary and the variable compensation. Sometimes there are different bonuses or spiffs for qualified leads if you can bring in opportunities, if you aren't directly responsible for those expansion. Depends on your model. So I think it varies significantly. And again, I think there can be real sense of ownership without directly executing on some of the renewal activity and commercial activity.
Yeah, I'm going to give a big fat, it depends. I've seen so many different models, but what I will say is a blanket statement: people do what you pay them to do. So incentivize the behaviors you want to see. If you want your team focused on renewals, great. Guess what? Compensate them on the retention. If you want to see people growing their accounts, great. Compensate them on growth. People do what you pay them to do. So put your money where your mouth is. If as a business leader, you want your team doing X, incentivize that. Make it part of your comp structure.
Love it. Another upvote question. CS is the new sales in SaaS, and we've all seen this meme on LinkedIn. We're hearing that this is now the new normal. So more and more, they're seeing sales leaders in charge of CS and the farmer mentality of CS turning it into a hunting mentality of sales. Does this shift mean that CS is dying out and turning into account managers with a sales as the priority function?
So I'm not aligned to this notion of a mentality, and if you're focused on revenue, then somehow you lose like the heart and soul of being a CSM, right? Or focusing on customer success. I think it's a really natural outcome to have renewals or to identify expansion opportunities if you're engaged and you're being your customer's advocate, if you're understanding their business, if you're understanding what they're trying to achieve. So dying CS, absolutely not. I think it's just kind of like CS on steroids is the way that I prefer to look at it. And as I said before, I think there can be, great people who start in CSM world who can go into sales, and likewise, but they're interchangeable, a lot of those skill sets. And I think there is still an absolute place for having customer success as the place where it really is have an understanding. It's just a different view of an understanding of that business. It used to be, do you know your customer? Do you know, Bob, or do you know with how they engage? To more knowing, what is Bob's boss asking them to do? Why is Bob asking me for this? And it's just a different level of layered understanding from maybe where we started some time ago.
Listen, this is just part of the evolution. That's the reality. Most of us maybe weren't alive when sales was going through their evolution and marketing were going through their evolutions. Those industries have been around for a very long time. But I'm telling you, at some point, they all evolved too. Sales wasn't birthed with this model of like input and output and like we have SDRs and we know that we need X amount of leads and do all these things. It evolved to that. We are in an evolutionary period. Customer success has not been around for 100 years. We are evolving, we're maturing, and part of our maturation is part of owning revenue. We are the closest to the customer. That is to our advantage. The more we know and the better we are structured to support our customers, the more natural it is for us to be owning retention and growth. If I know everything I know about my customer, I am better suited to have the conversations to grow them than I am if I insert an AM who is not as involved to say, now go and grow. That's where those unnatural sales motions happen, is when there's that disconnect. So if anything, I think this is an evolution and it should be more empowering to us. And we shouldn't see this as a negative. But no, customer success is not going anywhere. We're evolving and maturing.
Preach. And you're getting some love on the chat with 100% KF. Also, a few questions that are being upvoted. This is maybe, Mike, more for you because you're in the Series A space. I work for a SaaS startup, and as the founding member of the CS team, have noticed the shift from value to revenue generation and ownership. I've been told that in order to meet KPIs, my GRR average will need to be 85% or higher. What skills should I focus on to meet and exceed this goal? Is it the recap that you mentioned?
Yeah, congrats. You came to the right panel. This is this is the shift we're talking about. So it sounds like new year, new you. You maybe got a new boss or you got a new investment or something happened. And now your job is to focus on gross revenue retention on GRR. It needs to be 85%. That is your new KPI. Welcome to the new world. So what is it today? Is it 80? Is it 87? Right? Or did you get an easy goal? You need to figure out like, what is it today and what will it take to get there? Right. Here's a tip. It's probably not 85% yet. So you're going to have a couple of things that you need to do in order to get there. What are the bets to get there? Who are the customers? Go through the customer list, go through the segments, go through segmented performance on GRR, figure out where the leverage points are. Oh, if we did this thing, it could get better by this much. Or, oh, if we invested in a new headcount here or a new play here or a new tool here, we think that could produce this much incremental renewal in 2024. This is exactly the shift that we're talking about, where maybe your KPI before used to be something that was not as retention oriented. But if you're moving into that world, you need to move your mindset as well into, okay, here's where we are today, here's where I need to get to, and here's like the baby steps that I'm going to take along the way and the programs that I'm going to use to get there.
Solid framework. Another question from someone at a startup: what would be a happy medium approach to developing the right CS mindset, building scalable processes, yet remaining agile at a startup? I find that startups want the growth and frown on the process, yet it's causing many to come off as a mom and pop operation.
I think you can't over-engineer things, right? Like there has to be some process, but you've got to be flexible, right? So like Mike, I'm in an early stage company. Well, I wouldn't say early stage, been around for a long time, but we are small. And so I don't have a million resources. I don't have a lot of people on the team. We're constantly building and evolving our processes. I think it's about not being overly rigid. I always say it's the 80-20 applies here, right? If 80% of the time I can follow the processes we've designed and I've given my team and empowered them to introduce the right things at the right times based on what they know, right? Intervene appropriately. I don't know, make the changes. So I feel like it's good to have frameworks, but not be overly rigid about holding everyone accountable to doing all of these things, because things just won't get done, right? I think that this is the advantage you have at being a small company, is that you're probably all working together. You have more, like, I think, autonomy to lean in and kind of do the right things at the right time. Create frameworks that are just that. They're frameworks. They're not processes. Don't have 100 steps to get something done. Have an outline of how do we want to get there and some pathway there. Give instruction, but don't hold people so rigidly accountable to that. I'll give you an example. Like, how many times do I work with our sales team where I'm like, we have a sales to CS handoff process, but guess what? Sometimes there is something that we need to be flexible on, right? They've got to close this deal. This is the only way that they're going to be able to do it. If I was so rigid on my process, it would create so much friction in getting this thing done that it would maybe cannibalize the deal. So do I want to hinder the success of our business because I'm overly rigid and feel the need to be this control freak and hold everyone accountable to these processes? Be flexible, be nimble, be agile. And guess what? When something's not working, change it.
So one of the skills, Kristi just hit on it, we hadn't mentioned, was agility. And when I'm looking to hire, probably above all else in some ways, is that ability to be agile. Because yes, it's fantastic to have processes and frameworks. I'm a big process person. I love it. And yet I also recognize ditch what's not working. And you need to be able to evaluate. You need to be able to have the metrics. You need to be able to understand if something's working or not. But to Kristi's point, especially when you partner with sales, you don't want to be in any way impeding the process or slowing things down. And so I don't care if you're a startup. I don't care if you're a 25-year-old company. You need to have that agility, and there needs to be a sense of consistency to be able to always improve and get to a level of excellence to create expectations that customers can have. And yet there have to also be times where you just need to roll up your sleeves and say, let's think about it and do it differently. So my team kind of knows every year's kind of new year. You talk about new year, Mike. Every year's new year. And where are we going to maybe, invest a little bit more here or switch things up? Agility is key.
And we have a question from LinkedIn. Kevin wrote, I've excelled better in upsells and cross-sells when the product portfolio integrates well with each other and builds on existing value organically from the bread and butter products. How have leadership conversations with product moved the needle in creating organic need?
This is a complicated one, Kevin from LinkedIn. I'll say this, right? Like product roadmaps should be fed by multiple, sort of tributaries, right? One of those sources of feedback should be, bugs that your customers are experiencing. One should be sales and what more deals they could win if they had XYZ feature. Another should be CS, especially more so when CS owns a revenue number that's often bigger than sales, by the way. And so what you need to do is figure out how to work with your product leadership or whoever's deciding kind of the nature of the product portfolio and integration strategy or the packaging or the pricing or whatever it is, and have a very clear set of priorities from CS that if these things were different, we would make more money. I think that's a very appealing way to put it to a product manager, just in the same way, like, hey, if we don't fix these bugs, these 4 accounts are going to churn. Or from a sales leader, if we had these, we could go tackle a new market overseas, right? And so I think it's our responsibility to, again, speak the same language as the other folks who are having input into the conversation. And to me, for product, that's, the language of like, if you give me X, I can sell it and deliver you Y. CS, I think, should be able to do that. But again, it involves kind of tagging things with dollars and cents as opposed to nice to haves or frustrated customers or things of the old world.
I'm going to make some soft assumptions here. But if your customer success leader, whomever that is, I don't care what their role or title is, isn't part of those product conversations, I think that's a bigger problem, right? They need to be representing the customer base and what those opportunities are in all those discussions. If you're not part of the product roadmap planning and what the future of your company looks like, I think that's where the issue probably stems from. It's not you're not going to be able to fix this bottom up, right? So you've got to start at the top of the organization here. So if you're not part of those planning discussions and bringing customer data to the forefront, you're not going to be successful in changing that.
And then I think it's really understanding the value of what product is building for you as well. And so it can't just be this is a new feature or this is a new line that we have. I think it needs to surface that value discussion of kind of why we think it's going to add value for the customers, because of course they want to know how they'll be successful with you in the future, not just what you did in the past, right? That's what we always hear. So I think it really is understanding from product as well, the value that they have there. And again, it goes back to Kristi saying, you just have to have open lines of communication and have very, very strong collaboration. So I think the go-to-market teams, if you will, whether it's product sales and customer success, working very closely with product, if you're not aligned there, you are going to have some challenges.
Okay, can I contradict myself for a second also here? I will say sometimes, though, there is a business decision that we need to create a new product because we need to sell into a different part of the organization. So the value is not going to be necessarily in selling more to the customer you have today. And we'll say the customer might be a specific department or buyer, but the value could be we're trying to get wider in the organization. And so instead of selling to sales, we're now selling to marketing or we're selling to product, right? So it's also, I think, have a better understanding of what your overarching company strategy is. Like, what is the plan? Because there might be something there that's driving that behavior. So I don't know that I was contradicting myself, but giving another point of view.
I think it goes back to knowing kind of what the idea is and aligning on that notion, the value of it, regardless of for which population.
Yeah.
Tangentially.
By the way, that mechanic of finding new wallets to go get a share of is often how you expand that revenue retention, right? It's like one of the number one expansion strategies for SaaS businesses, like time eternal. And so, for a lot of you out there who are maybe thinking about doing the planning process that we've been talking about here, I'm here, I need to get to here, how am I going to get there? You may notice like you're short, like a point or two or 5 points, right? Well, the answer is you might need something new to sell. And I think that's like a hugely important ask for CS to be able to surface. Like, if we want to keep growing this business or we want to re-accelerate growth in 2024 compared to 23, something's going to need to change. And we need something new to sell to go get a new wallet share. It's a great point.
But now I think, can we talk about for a second that if that is the case and we're running that kind of cross-sell or upside, depends, I don't care how you classify it, that motion though, and you're selling to a new buyer, that might actually be a new sales motion and require a completely different skill set and a different member of your organization to do that as well. So it might not make the most sense for the CSM who is supporting a specific product to a specific buyer and driving value there. If it is a net new sales motion, maybe the salesperson is responsible for that.
Valid point. And we brought up Bob London. He had a great question for the group. So we'll read it out loud here. Which do you recommend? Teaching CS true sales skills or start where they are by helping them grow their natural curiosity, listening, and empathy to become more opportunity aware?
I'll take door number 2. because I've tried door number one, it didn't work too well. Tried doing Sandler training and MedPick training and stuff like that, for sort of CSM teams, like as is. And it was not super successful. There's some people who will gravitate towards it because they're a little more sales minded, or they sort of have like an intellectual curiosity in the sales craft. But that stuff is two things. One, it's really geared for AEs and like the new business type of sale for the most part. And then two is like it tends to be like pretty sophisticated in terms of like how to sell. And most of our CSM teams are starting at a baseline that's just not there. It's different if you've gone through a BDR program for 5 years at a great company, and now you're like in senior AE selling whatever, like you're ready for that kind of stuff. Most CSMs are not. So I think it's far better to meet them where they are, cultivate the natural curiosity when you talk about discovery, talk about, not forecasting and pipeline management, but like project management and accuracy. Like those are values that CSMs tend to have that translate nicely into, sort of the general ballpark of sales skills without having to teach them how to do like MedPick, on a random Wednesday, which I just don't think will stick that well.
I think there's some overlapping content at times. I mean, my team's gone through kind of like the why stay and why evolve methodologies and looking at those. And so I don't know if they're sales light necessarily, Mike, or not. They're not certainly in some of these other, kind of for net new sales. But I think it is a lot about when you're talking about the retention and how to think about why to, get your customers to stay with you. I think there can be some, but I think I would align with you as well. I think it is focused on meeting them where they are and trying to expand to them. Because fundamentally, I think part of the success of CS is, again, it's a natural evolution. It's a natural. If they're doing their jobs really well, that's when the renewals, that's when the upsells are going to come from that. And again, they do have to have their minds open and have the right acumen to it, but you're not trying to change their stripes entirely. You want them to stay customer success folks and to stay true to that.
Thank you, Marisa. So we are at the end of our time for today. Please let us know what you thought of today's conversation by posting your feedback on LinkedIn and tagging me, our guests, or Success Coaching. I want to thank our guests for spending the time with us today and for their ideas, their thoughts, the insights, and the best practices. Thank you very much, Marisa, Kristi, and Mike. One final note, great CS leaders know that they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. That's why we created the CS Leadership Roundtable to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. Once again, we hope to see you next month on March 13th, where we're going to discuss how CS leaders can develop retention strategies for their team. Have a great rest of your week and month, everyone, and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.